Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Great! Today we're heading to the Faroe Islands. Going to catch up on some recent news from October 26th and 27th.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, we've got a mix of sources here, all from Faroe's news sites. Should give us a good feel for what's been happening. Ready to feel like a Faroe's insider.
Let's do it.
Okay, so first up, we've got to talk about politics. Things are a little shaken up over there right now. Big news is the resignation of Hanni Hoydal.
Chairman of the Joe Verdi Party.
Right, exactly.
Big deal because Joe Verdi has been a major force in Faroes politics, pushing for more independence from Denmark.
And this resignation, well, it's happening in the middle of a bunch of controversy. There was that vote of no confidence against one of their ministers, Ingelindi Strum. And now they're even talking about bringing in an investigator to look into the minister's actions.
Adds a whole other layer to it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And on top of that, nobody knows who's going to replace Hoydal yet.
So the future of the party is kind of up in the air.
Exactly. And then, as if all that wasn't enough, there are these municipal elections coming up in Faroe. And a new political group has popped up there, trying to shake things up.
Challenging the established parties.
Yeah. One candidate was even quoted saying they want to give voters more choices, really make some changes.
Interesting to see that kind of sentiment, especially with all the drama happening on the national level.
It really does show how even in a place like the Faroe Islands, politics are constantly changing and evolving. Okay, so let's take a break from all the serious stuff for a minute and talk about something a little more fun. The Faroes Mentinar Bre Vislunir were just handed out.
The National Cultural Awards.
Exactly. Their version of the Oscars, basically. And the main prize this year went to Hanni Bartali.
Covers all kinds of art forms, music, literature, visual arts.
Pretty big deal, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Shows how much the Faroe Islands values their artists. They really support and celebrate their creative talent.
It's pretty amazing how such a small country puts so much importance on the arts. It says a lot about their culture and how proud they are of their heritage. Okay, ready for something completely different?
Hit me with it.
So get this. A tagged pilot whale was recorded diving deeper than ever before, over 1,100 meters.
Wow. That's deeper than the Burj Khalifa is tall.
Crazy, right?
Has scientists pretty excited? It tells us a lot about what these whales are capable of. Raises all sorts of new questions about how they behave down in the deep ocean.
It really makes you realize how much we still don't know about the ocean.
So much to explore.
Speaking of milestones, the Salvation Army is celebrating a pretty big anniversary in the Faroe Islands.
100 years.
A whole century of helping people and making a positive impact on Faroe society.
Pretty remarkable, huh?
It is. Shows how organizations like that can become such an important part of a community.
And while we're on the topic of celebrating, we've got to mention another big birthday. Bergilj Eiríksfoss, who everyone knows as Begin, just turned 100.
Imagine all the changes she's seen over the years. Right. It's amazing to think about. And getting ready to happen. There's Fjölmenningarvika in Tórshavn.
Diversity Week.
That's it. And they're even having a children's parade. Seems like a really fun way to celebrate different cultures.
Definitely.
And last but not least, a quick sports update. The Faroe Islands are competing in the NEVZA U19 Volleyball Championships. Both the men's and women's teams are there, giving it their all.
Representing their nation.
Exactly.
Always inspiring to see young athletes like that putting in the work and showing off their skills.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that even small nations like the Faroe Islands can make a splash on the world stage. So we've covered a lot of ground already. Political shakeups, cultural celebrations, even a record-breaking whale. It's amazing how all these different stories come together to give us a glimpse into life in the Faroe Islands.
It really does paint a fascinating picture, doesn't it? All these little pieces coming together.
It does. You know what I keep thinking about? That balance between tradition and change we talked about earlier. How it pops up in so many of these stories.
Yeah, you can really see it playing out.
Like with the whole Hanni Hoydal situation. He's been such a key figure pushing for more autonomy for the Faroes. His resignation is definitely a turning point.
Definitely makes you wonder what's next for the Joe Verdi Party. Will they stick to the same path or change things up?
And what about those elections in Faroe? Think that new political list could mean people are ready for bigger changes, not just in one town, but across the whole country.
Could be. Local elections can be a sign of what people are thinking on a larger scale. That candidate who talked about wanting more choices, maybe that reflects a broader feeling, a desire for new approaches and new ideas.
Makes you wonder how those political changes could affect everything else, from social policies to cultural stuff.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Political decisions don't exist in a bubble. They have a real impact on people's lives, on how society functions.
And speaking of how society functions, I keep coming back to Begin, turning 100 years old. Think about all the changes she's lived through, not just technology and buildings, but how Faroe's society itself has changed.
It's incredible. When she was born, the Faroe Islands were all about fishing and farming. Now they have a much more diverse economy, tourism is booming, they're more connected to the rest of the world.
It really shows you how much can change in a lifetime, both for individuals and for whole countries.
It really does. And it also shows how resilient people can be, how we adapt and change as the world changes around us.
You know what else strikes me about Begin's story? It says a lot about community and connection. It seems like the Faroes have a really strong sense of belonging, a tight-knit social fabric. That probably plays a big part in her long and healthy life.
That's a good point. Lots of research shows that strong social connections are good for your health, both physically and mentally. And in a close community like the Faroe Islands, those connections must be even stronger.
It makes you wonder if there are things we can learn from how the Faroes build community, especially these days when so many people feel isolated and lonely.
Yeah, maybe. There's something to be said for having a shared identity, taking care of each other, and celebrating what we achieve both as individuals and as a community.
And speaking of celebrating, I'm still thinking about those Mentanarverislinir, the cultural awards. It's pretty amazing that a country as small as the Faroe Islands puts so much emphasis on supporting the arts.
It shows how much they value creativity. They recognize that art is a big part of what defines a nation's identity.
It also shows how much they appreciate their own cultural heritage. Those awards aren't just about recognizing talented people. They're about preserving and promoting Faroe's art for future generations.
And maybe they're also a way for the Faroe Islands to share their culture with the world, to make people feel proud of who they are, both within the islands and beyond.
Okay, let's switch gears again for a minute. Back to the ocean and that amazing pilot whale dive. Over 1,100 meters. It's hard to even imagine going that deep.
It really shows how much we still don't know about the ocean and all the creatures that live there. We think of it as this huge empty space, but it's full of life, and so much of it is still a mystery.
And it's not just about discovering new species or exploring the deepest parts. It's also about understanding how what we do affects this incredible ecosystem.
Mhm.
Climate change, pollution, overfishing, those are all things we need to deal with if we want to protect the ocean for the future.
Right. This whale's deep dive shows how connected everything is. What happens in one part of the ocean can affect the whole thing. It's our responsibility to understand those connections and take care of the planet.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? We like to think we're separate from nature, but we're really a part of it, and our choices have consequences that reach far and wide.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Diversity Week in Torshavn. It's a celebration of how rich and diverse human culture is, but it also points to a deeper understanding. We're all connected, not just as humans, but as part of this planet.
It's like the Faroe Islands are embracing this idea of interconnectedness on so many levels: politics, culture, their relationship with nature.
It's like they're creating this tapestry, weaving together tradition and change, the local and the global, the human and the natural world. And the result is something really unique and inspiring.
This conversation has really changed how I see the Faroe Islands.
Mm.
I used to think of them as this remote, isolated place, but it's clear they're very much a part of the world, facing the same challenges and opportunities as everyone else.
And they're doing it in a way that honors their past, but also looks to the future.
Before we move on, one last question. What's the most important thing our listeners should take away from our deep dive into the Faroes news?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Even in a place that seems far away like the Faroe Islands, we can learn things about what it means to be human. Their story reminds us that we're all connected. Tradition and change can exist together, and the choices we make today shape the future.
That's a great way to put it. And it reminds us that there's always something new to learn, even in places we think we know. It feels like we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah,
There's so much more to discover about the Faroe Islands.
definitely. But even in this short time, we've found some pretty amazing stories.
Speaking of amazing, I'm still thinking about that pilot whale and its record-breaking dive. It really makes you realize how much we still don't know about the natural world, even in places that have been studied a lot.
It does make you wonder what other incredible things are out there waiting to be discovered, not just in the ocean, but everywhere on the planet.
Yeah, it's like an invitation to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop being amazed by the world around us.
And as we explore, it's important to do it with respect and a sense of responsibility. What we do has an impact not just on the environment, but on future generations.
That's so true. And that reminds me of what we talked about earlier, how the Faroe Islands are so committed to sustainability, from their fishing practices to using renewable energy.
It's like they're taking a big picture approach, understanding that the health of their community depends on the health of the environment.
And I'm also really struck by how strong their sense of community is. We saw it in all these stories, celebrating their culture, supporting their athletes, honoring their elders. The Furrows really seem to have a deep sense of belonging.
Yeah, you can definitely feel that togetherness, that shared purpose. It's like they're all part of one big family, there for each other no matter what.
It makes you think. Maybe there's something we can all learn from them, especially in a world where people are often so focused on themselves.
Maybe. There's something to be said for having that shared identity, celebrating what we achieve both individually and as a community, understanding that we all rely on each other.
Well, as we wrap up our Faroes adventure, I'd love to leave our listeners with one final thought. What advice would you give them based on what we've learned today?
I'd say be curious, seek out new perspectives, and never stop learning. The world is full of amazing stories just waiting to be discovered. And when we open ourselves up to those stories, we learn more about ourselves, our communities, and our place in the world.
That's beautiful. And on that note, we'll say goodbye to the Faroe Islands for now. We'll definitely take these lessons with us as we continue to explore the world, one fascinating story at a time. Until next time, keep diving deep.